evening, everyone. I'm just going to resize a couple of my screens so I can actually see your faces. Well, it's great to be with you for our 9th meeting on November 9th. Another amazing 4 weeks have passed since we last saw you, with a lot happening, but it's great to be with you again and to kick off our next conversation. So as always, we'll start with a little Zoom orientation, just a reminder of some of our general guidelines. We ask that when you're not speaking, if you don't mind muting yourself, that'd be great. We'll have a lot of time for discussion tonight. We're going to stay in the big group again for this meeting, and we'll try to be clear about where those kind of questions and comments are, but feel free to raise your hand or use the chat to get in the queue. And for our audience members, we ask, if you don't mind, that you'll mute yourself and turn your video off, except during public comment period, just so our task force can kind of get the feeling like they're around a table with each other, and seeing everyone in person. And we'll keep the chat generally open for troubleshooting, but I also want you to go to the chat and see the link to the great Imagine Black 2020 debate that Shani moderated, because it's awesome. So our plan for tonight, as you saw in our email last week, we're going to change things up a little bit from what we previewed at the end of our last meeting. So after we get through our normal welcome and housekeeping information, we're actually going to stick with highway tolling for one more meeting. And Shoshana will explain a little bit about why we're doing that. But in general, you know, we had such a robust discussion at our last conversation. It's so timely. We really felt like we should continue going and solidify some of the themes and the messages that were emerging before we move on. So what we'll do is we'll kind of review that why, review those emerging themes, have some time for deeper discussion, as well as we want to share some supplemental information that responds to a few of the questions or topics that came up at our last meeting. And then we'll also make sure that we're documenting those questions that we still don't have answers to, or we want to dive into deeper, so that we've got a good game plan going into next year. We're going to give you a bit of a teaser trailer at the end of the meeting of our next upcoming pricing typologies, and we'll wrap up and get you out of here by 8. So before I go any further, were there any questions, comments, or concerns about our summary from the last meeting? Not seeing any hands pop up, I don't believe, so we'll consider that final, and it's on our website if you want to access it. And does anyone who's here tonight as a member of the public want to raise your hand, which is in the participants tab, I believe, and provide public comment for us tonight? Okay, I'm not seeing hands come up. So we'll keep going. We do have some members of the public here listening in. It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here. All right, I'm going to run through a few project updates that have happened since we last met, and then hand it over to Shoshana. So what has changed since the last time we met? A lot has changed since the last time we met, to state the obvious. Specifically, in the last week, we've all been living through a very long and drawn out election process. It's not actually fully wrapped up, but we want to acknowledge that in addition to the federal and national races, there were some local races that had results, and those have implications for the Bureau of Transportation. And so, you know, there have been some changes in the makeup of our city council, with Mingus Maps getting elected to council. At this stage, you know, what we know you probably have questions, and we as staff also have some questions. And what we know is that this work is really important, and we have a charge from City Council to engage this task force and carry out the charge. And so that's what we're going to do. We'll keep you updated as we learn more, and as things, you know, change over the new year and looking into next year as our new council gets going. We also know that some of the local ballot measures have implications for transportation, and the Metro Get Moving measure did not pass. So I'm sure that will be something that we can talk about it in our meetings going forward. But we just want to acknowledge the moment, acknowledge that once again, in between poem conversations, a lot has happened, and it has a lot of implications for the work that we're doing. So thanks for hanging in there with us, and being on this ride that we all are on together. I also wanted to note that the Metro congestion pricing study continues to go on. And I know we mentioned, I think now 2 meetings ago, that they would love to tap into the expertise and perspective of POEM, and they still want to do that. You know, like all of us, I think they're reacting to COVID and capacity constraints and just the realities of this year. So that meeting has been pushed a little bit, and they're now looking at early December. They haven't picked an exact date or time, but as soon as they do, what we're going to plan to do is write up kind of what this opportunity is, send it out to all of you. It's optional. Don't feel like you are pressured to attend, but if you're interested, they're just really looking to get some of your expertise and perspective as they are coming up with the equity metrics for their specific technical study. And the other thing that we mentioned, we kind of previewed at the last meeting, we're still really hoping to connect with all of you via, we'll send out a little short email and survey, but we would also, if you'd like to talk on the phone and just kind of have a one-on-one about how this process is going, we're still really looking to do that, and we will hope to connect in November and December. And finally, as you know, we've already mentioned, this meeting is going to look a little different than what we were planning, and we've actually done a few further refinements to the task force work plan that we want to preview for you. So we did this revision to really try to make the flow of our meetings a bit more logical. You know, we're a little bit learning or building this plane as we fly it and learning about this process as we go. And so we're trying to make this refinement to make the best use of your time and the most logical connections between topics. So tonight, you know, we're going to continue on tolling. We're going to discuss and confirm those emerging themes. We'll review a little bit more information to supplement that conversation. And we'll give a sneak peek on our next typologies, which we've done a bit of a reorder, and we're actually going to go into cordons, area pricing, and road usage charges next. For a couple of reasons. One, because they're a bit more of a logical build on from highway tolling. They also are, especially in the case of road usage charges, timely, given what's going on in the state and in our region about the Oregon road usage charge pilot program at this time. We also, kind of a big update you can see there in gray, we are recommending that we give you guys a month off. Give you the month of December off. It's been a busy year. It's been a busy, you've just poured a lot of energy and time into this. And we as staff also feel like we need to kind of have a month to catch up on the technical side. We're reaching that point in the process where we've been talking in a very theoretical space, and we really want to start applying some technical tools to this. And part of doing that's just going to be having a little bit more time to do that. So unless there are any major objections, we'll give you the month of December off, reconvene in January to talk cordons, area pricing, and road usage charge, and then come back to commercial services in February and March. And that then allows us to really reach the spring, ready to bring it all together and apply a bunch of these, or apply some modeling tools as well as some supplemental research to really start looking at these themes and these kind of emerging ideas in concert with one another. The part that got cut off there is to inform final recommendations, and we're still thinking that we'll probably wrap up in the summer. You know, we want to be really respectful of your time. If it does slip past July, we'll talk to you about how you're feeling about that. But our goal is to wrap this up as an 18-month process, as we set out to do. Are there any questions about this revised work plan? You just have to promise me that, you know, on that second Monday in December, when you're not here, you like eat something really delicious. You like take that 2 hours back in your life and you like bake a pie or something. Okay.
Wait, I got a question.
Oh, of course. Sorry, Sharifa, go for it.
I just was wondering, the commercial services, what does that mean exactly?
Sure, and actually it's kind of a truncated title. We normally call it commercial services and right-of-way access. So that would be things that involve pricing companies that utilize our roads to do business. So that could include like urban delivery, Uber Eats and Amazon Prime, that kind of thing. Access to just kind of deliveries on our right-of-way, but then also transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft and pricing that might impact them.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, thank you. That was a good question. Any other questions? Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to Shoshana to help us dive in on the emerging themes around tolling.
Good evening, everyone. So actually, first, Emma just mentioned this, but I was just going to spend one more minute talking a little bit more about why we're sticking with tolling for this month's meeting. As Emma said, you know, the conversation last month and really the last 2 months was just really rich, and we thought you guys were you know, bringing up just really important points, and we wanted to make sure that we did that sort of polling, but we wanted to make sure that we're really trying to capture it so that we can continue to move what you're saying forward. And part of the reason that feels so important is because there really is a very active conversation at the regional level about tolling, the tolling on I-205, tolling on I-5 in various places potentially. And the more we thought about it, if we wait another 6 months and then share some recommendations up with leadership to impact those conversations, you know, there may be some things set in stone already. And so that's why we felt like it was worth seeing how comfortable you are with us capturing, even if it's still a pretty high level, knowing that there's still more information to share, but seeing if we can start to capture some things and sort of share it along with leadership to help inform these conversations. And then the third one is also, if as we do that, it is feeling, you know, there are similarities across parking and many of the things that we heard from you all there, and what we heard in tolling, and sort of the more we can start to sort of pull out some important themes, it feels like it will just continue to help inform the other conversations going forward. Not that everything is the same by any means, but you know, again, we want to be respectful of what you're hearing and sort of continue to advance important points that you're making. And so just you know, the graphic on the right, I think we also mentioned last time, several times, there's nuance to being perfectly transparent. There's nuance to how this task force informs these regional tolling conversations. We are not, the City of Portland is not leading them. We are a participant in them. And you as a task force are set up to inform city leadership, first directly BPS and PBOT leadership, and then City Council. And as Emma already mentioned, and we all know, City Council is also changing. So it's, you know, it's not exactly a dotted line. You gotta say something, we sort of share it, and we can promise the level of influence it will have. On the other hand, again, these conversations are really active. There are places at the Oregon Transportation Commission, you know, regional conversations at metro bodies like JPACT, the ODOT Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, which are all having, you know, really relevant conversations. And so the more we can capture what you're sharing share it with our leadership, and then hopefully help it inform how the city shows up, the more we think your input will have a difference. So that's why we're revisiting a little bit of this tonight. So as far as the discussion, as you saw on the agenda, at the very end, assuming we have time, we're going to do a little bit of a sneak peek on cordons and ruck. But for the discussion, a lot of this we're going to stay in, we're not going to break into small groups again. Not that we'll never do that again, but we thought the large group discussion went really well last time for sort of really sharing ideas. And so we're gonna sort of break into do this in 3 topics again. First, and I think this is at the opposite order of what we did last time, but first, seeing if we can capture some high level themes that we heard from you all around sort of the overall question of tolling and equitable mobility, then focusing on tolling system design and priority outcomes, and then tolling revenue and complementary strategies. And we're both going to try to sort of capture some of what we heard, or share back, reflect back some of what we heard from you, weave in a little bit of additional information that we think speaks to some of the comments that you raised, and then share some sort of themes that we tried to capture to see if they're, you know, hitting some of the overall points. And get your feedback, and we'll see sort of how that goes, and if it feels like we're in a good place to really start to share those, you know, or not by the end of the meeting. So any questions about that before we dive in? Or does that sound like a reasonably good plan?
And I'll just preface, Shoshana said we flipped this from last time just because it kind of felt weird to like save the punchline for last, the like big overarching how we're feeling about tolling and equitable mobility. We also recognize that like the way you design the system, the way you use the revenue, what we've heard from you is that that really matters. So it might feel a little jarring and we'll just try to kind of go with the flow, but just wanted to share that disclaimer.
Shoshana, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any way for us to convene with the equitable mobility group that ODOT is pulling together for one session? It seems like rather than filtering all of our information through these different levels and layers in order to give it to ODOT, why not provide an opportunity for us to just, and I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but since everything is on Zoom, I don't think like a room capacity is an issue. It's more of a scheduling issue. So
that is a really interesting question. And again, I'm just going to be super honest here. There is, if for City of Portland committees and task forces to sort of share official City of Portland, recommendations, we regardless of the topic, we have sort of city rules that say like it's supposed to sort of go up through City Hall and then they express our official position. So there's not multiple City of Portland positions going. On the other hand, this is more of a sort of a work group of how do you do equitable mobility, and Michael Espinoza is sitting on that group, and so he in some ways is that is that conduit. But right, could we have sort of a joint meeting? I think that's absolutely worth exploring. And I think they've been having in many ways very similar conversations, and just getting everyone in a room and say, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're thinking. It sounds like that would just be an efficient, nice way to share thoughts across the groups. So I think we should look into it. I don't know, Emma or anyone else on my team have thoughts?
I would just say if, Metro is engaging this group as part of their technical study, this feels like a congruent kind of thing. I mean, I think Shoshana's totally right. There's some nuance with like official city policy and sort of how that goes. But when we're advisory groups thinking together, I feel like that's really exciting. And thank you, Hao, for bringing up the suggestion. We'll definitely follow up on that. Any other questions before we dive in? Okay.
Okay, so the first topic that we talked last time was, or again, sorry, the third topic last time was this question of overall, can tolling help to increase equitable mobility? And we shared these with you last time just as a quick refresher when we asked you all, or asked you to respond to this question: highway tolling has the potential to increase equitable mobility. A number of you thought you strongly agreed it absolutely could. Another good chunk of you somewhat agreed and thought with the right design and discounts and revenue, it really could. And then want to be really clear that not everyone agreed. There was some opinion that strongly disagreed with this, that highway tolling just really doesn't have the potential to increase equitable mobility. And then the poll on the second question was, if highway toll revenue is subject to the constitutional restriction, tolling could still potentially increase equitable mobility. And here we definitely saw different feedback. That's a little bit less than half of you still either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed, and a little bit potentially more than half of you at least somewhat disagreed, had some real concerns, I would say. And this speaks to the importance in many of our conversations, the importance of revenue use. And if there's restrictions, that's gonna limit the potential for really coming up with equitable outcomes. And then again, a strongly disagree response, and as well as some folks or a folk who just really wasn't sure. So the next question that we asked in this category was around highway tolling was a response to highway tolling should be used in our region to manage our existing highway system as efficiently as possible before we expand highways. And this was sort of a way of, again, this isn't really a theoretical, we're not talking entirely theoretically. We're talking, if there is a choice between continuing to expand highways versus using tolling to try to manage the system better, there we saw different results where really a significant number of you strongly agreed, a few more somewhat agreed, and a couple of folks somewhat disagreed. No one felt strongly that it wasn't possible. So if it feels like if it's the choice between expansion and not, there's more folks who feel comfortable about that. Moving on, we wanted to pull out a few other comments that came out, and this is not, we know the conversation was so rich, there was definitely more that came out. This was not everything, but a few that we wanted to really highlight was a point around, what really are we comparing when we're thinking about these questions? Are we talking about, in comparison to what the situation is today, or are we thinking about what the transportation system might look like in the future, and potentially a future with more driving, more congestion, more carbon emissions? Is that where we're looking at these potential options? We also, again, heard real skepticism that tolling could ever minimize burden on low-income and BIPOC Portlanders, and essentially that it could ever be equitable, for the really important reasons that a lot of past decision-making has led to harmful outcomes and distrust of government and doing things differently. So not everyone thinks this is possible. Another comment was around the concern of sort of I think there was conversation to the point that people still need to drive, and maybe we're not trying to limit for everyone, and then a concern about a false narrative of right to pollute, and really just sort of questions and good discussion again around, is it our goal to create a future where everyone can drive less and pollute less regardless of demographics, or due to existing inequities or for other reasons, do we have a different answer to that question in the short term and the long term? Are we trying to really switch the system so that everyone drives less now or maybe in the future, or not? But good comments on that. And I think relatedly, acknowledgement of our car-centric society that we all live in right now, and that many people, for many reasons, will still need to use cars. And is this then really an opportunity to sort of reimagine how we're using cars, how we're accessing cars, things like car share, carpooling, etc. So those were some, again, not all of the rich conversation that we had, but a few of the, in addition to the charts, a few of the comments that we wanted to pull out. And then a little bit in sort of in response, and my bar with all of your pictures is in my way. We are gonna show you then, we also came up with what we've been calling sort of themes to try to capture some of that. Before we do that, we wanted to share just a little bit more information sort of as it relates to some of those points. I think as we've all been talking over the last couple months, there continue to be themes of the inequities in the status quo and the problems with the status quo. And we have mentioned, I think, a couple of times that we were going to come back with you with sort of a data snapshot of a lot of different data and try to frame it in the categories of the equitable mobility framework that we've put together. Sorry. And the categories being around mobility and access and climate and health and safety and economic opportunity. This is not that. This is not a complete data snapshot. This is not the whole story by any means. But we did, there's a few points that we wanted to sort of just start to sort of share with you all about, again, and some of these you've seen before, some of these we've shared, but we're trying to sort of organize it and again, sort of help us all think about what is the situation right now, and then how does that inform what seems like a good idea. So in the category of inequities in mobility, access, and options, and again, not that this is a whole story at all, just a few things that that we're able to do. And I want to be honest also, we know there's, in our equitable mobility framework, we're really interested in demographics around race. We separately call out impacts on BIPOC Portlanders, impacts on low-income Portlanders, impacts on people in the disability community. We don't have good data on, we would like to be able to really robustly sort of share data across these categories and, full demographic data. And there's a lot that we don't have. So we're working to find more and more, but we also don't have a complete picture. But a couple of things we wanted to pull out are that one thing we have seen in census data is a greater proportion of BIPOC Portlanders, 17% ride public transit than white Portlanders at 11%. And, one thing as it relates to driving going up, we've seen that bus speeds have continued to decrease since 2000. There's been a decrease of 14%. And that, some of that at least is probably because buses are getting more and more stuck in traffic. We see inequities in car access. 31% of Black households don't have access to a car compared to 14% of white households. I believe this data is from 2015. So and yes, Ingrid is saying all of this is pre-COVID. So we don't have up-to-date information. And something, again, we're trying and we're sort of starting to get some snippets of what's going on with COVID, but we don't have complete data right now. So all of this is pre-COVID, and we're all trying to figure out what happens, eventually, assuming that we eventually come fully out of COVID. I'm gonna knock on something. BIPOC Portlanders, we also see have access to 27% fewer jobs and services within a 45-minute transit ride. I'm sure there's many reasons for this, combined, geography reasons and bus access reasons, all of those things. Inequities in climate and health outcomes. This one isn't on here. We've talked many times about transportation being in the Portland and Oregon area, contributing about 40% to greenhouse gases, and that's been on the rise. Again, pre-COVID, I believe that it is going down this year, I think, worldwide, but the speculation at least is that that's a temporary pause and that it's likely to go up. And I think here even we're not 100% sure, so I probably shouldn't say this aloud, but I feel like relatively recently I heard that like highway traffic is back to about 90%. So I don't think that's the same everywhere, but traffic is definitely going back, and I would assume that greenhouse gas emissions are going back too, but they have been on the rise. And climate impacts, both here and other places, can disproportionately burden BIPOC and low-income people. And then one specific stat around air quality, more diverse Portland neighborhoods as defined as having greater than 15% BIPOC community members experience 2 to 3 times higher rates of diesel pollution. And then in the area of safety, we have seen over time that people walking in East Portland are 2.5 times more likely to be killed in traffic crashes. And then we had really rich discussion a number of times about the importance of not just thinking about safety in terms of traffic safety. And there's all sorts of other implications or other safety concerns for people on the right of way, whether it's from hate crimes or other personal safety issues. And then something that was not so long ago reported in a paper was in 2019 traffic stops, police searched Black people at more than twice the rate of white motorists and pedestrians. So, lots of ways in which we see disparities in safety. And I think I saw a flash from Howe of a note saying that we should look at housing as well. Super, super important point, and we can work on bringing that one out here. And then inequities and economic opportunity, you know, one of the things in this area when we talked about the equitable mobility framework, we talked a lot about workforce impacts. And I'll have to say we're still working through a lot of data there. One thing that came up relatively quickly is the significant underrepresentation of women in transportation sector jobs. We have not, as a group, talked a lot about the impact or about sort of gender disparities, but something that we can continue to think about and see if we want to continue to explore that more. One thing that we did see in recent data is that BIPOC Portlanders are underrepresented specifically in freight jobs. I think not a huge amount, but a little bit. And freight jobs are a portion of the transportation sector where there is actually relatively higher paying jobs for people with only a high school education. So they can be good jobs, and there is some underrepresentation. And then just one last piece is that studies have really shown that commute time is a critical factor in the ability to escape poverty. And again, from a Portland statistic, we've seen that average commute times are 20% longer for Black Portlanders than white Portlanders. So I'm catching some of the flashes of the chat as they go by. I don't think I'm catching all of them, but we will look more closely and continue. Again, we're trying to build this out more and more. So, and this even is not everything that we have so far, but just wanted to share a little bit and look forward to continuing to build it out and hear from you about how we can do a better and better job. And then, you know, one of the reasons to bring this in right now is, you know, not, first I want to be really clear that not all of this is, you know, is tied to driving. There are a number of ways in which the sort of reliance of all of us on, or in general, on single occupancy vehicle driving, you know, it is tied to greenhouse gas emissions, at least if they're in combustion engine cars. It is tied to safety issues. It has system impacts, which we think work their way into some of the disparities in commute times and decreased job access and things like that. So sort of making our system overall more efficient, we continue to think it helps to make a more equitable system, helps to decrease some of these inequities. At the same time, changing so we have more different mode, better mode shift and people getting around in different ways is not going to do anything about workforce issues in the transportation sector. It's not going to do anything about personal safety and traffic stops and things like that. So there's, you know, this is a complex system that we're seeing here and a really robust set of indicators that we'd like to look to make a more robust system. And again, want to keep acknowledging that. And also, actually, before we go on, the last one, on the 31% of Black households which don't have access to a car compared to 14%, you know, that one also is a really complex sort of data point and, you know, lots of things to think about. Does that mean that we should be concentrating on making non-driving options better because there's a lot of folks who don't have access to cars? Or does that mean that we should be trying to get people more access to cars so that we even out that disparity? And I think lots of different thoughts that we've heard from all of you. But again, just trying to sort of share some data that speaks to many of the things that you all have brought up. There's a lot of words from me on this slide. So just a couple more and then we'll pause and let you all do some talking. So with all of that, and sort of the situation that we're seeing right now, I think one of the points was, are we looking, that we heard from you all last time, was, are we looking at you know, tolling as it could impact the system now or as it could potentially impact the system in the future? And again, we're seeing some issues now, at least as far as the things that are related to a system where we have a lot of single occupancy vehicle trips happening. That is still projected to get worse by most of the, given the modeling that we're seeing and the investment plan that we're seeing in the region. There are 500,000 more people who are expected to live in our region by 2040. And in our regional transportation plan, which Metro helps put together, there's already a plan for putting about 15 billion of capital investment in and about 30 billion in operations and maintenance investment, including, my understanding is 5 billion for transit expansion. And yet this isn't projected to sort of make enough progress on reducing the cumulative vehicle miles traveled. The 2040 per person VMT goal that the region has set is a 10% reduction, but the modeled projection after they consider all of the investments they're planning to make is only 4%. And the 2040 mode share goal, again, no one is ever projecting that everyone stop driving, but rather that a significant number of folks are getting around in other ways. And so the projection and the goal is to have 45% of trips either by transit, biking, or walking. But the projection after they put in all the investments is that only 19% of trips will be by transit, biking, and walking. So, the bottom line here is that even with really significant investments over the next 20 years in transit and other multimodal planned projects, we're not really seeing driving decreasing sort of as much as we think we need to create a system with less emissions and less safety impacts and some better better safety and equity outcomes. There's too many things flashing. Sorry, I'm just going to keep going. I think I can't keep up with the chat right now.
No worries, Shoshana. Keep going, and Bao, I'm going to get to your question verbally in a minute.
All right, I think I got one more slide, and then we'll get to the discussion. So, partly because the modeling and the plan investments, aren't really going to get us exactly to our goals. We have a number of super smart PBOT staff who are doing various initiatives to look at, what are other strategies that can help to get us there. And there's one team who is using a modeling tool called Vision Eval, this tool is really exploring what are strategies that are needed to reach our greenhouse gas reductions. And later Emma's going to talk about another set of sort of research that is also looking at some similar things, but this is a technical tool, and I don't think I'm not in the details enough to sort of get into it too much, but we did want to share some early key insights coming from this, that basically emissions reductions, to get to emissions reductions of the degree that we really want to see as a region, we get there more easily if we're doing a sort of a group of complementary strategies in tandem, what we call carrots, or really things like transportation demand management, which is sharing information, sharing encouragement strategies for people to do things like take transit, to walk, and to bike. The easy encouragement, sort of happy things of helping people make the right choice. And if we do those in connection with sticks, more of the things like we're talking about, pricing, disincentivizing, making the driving choice a little bit harder. And in the modeling, they really see the best outcomes from a greenhouse gas perspective when they do it all together, as opposed to just one, all carrots, even I think all sticks, that doesn't work. But if you do it together, you get to some of the outcomes we want. And the other high level takeaway is that the city really can't do it alone. Portland-based strategies need to be combined with strong regional and state strategies. And so, the bottom line there essentially is just that there's not a silver bullet solution. We're going to need to do a bunch of things together to get to the system that we want. So I think there was a lot of words by me. I apologize if that was too much. And then, so on this next slide, what we really wanted to do was to try, and again, recognizing that we have some other sort of themes we're going to roll up specific to revenue use and a tolling system design, but to see if this, if this starts to resonate with you all, and if not, how, that to the higher level question of tolling and equitable mobility, we're feeling like what you all are saying is tolling has the potential to improve equitable mobility over the status quo, particularly compared to a do-nothing scenario, which will likely lead to either increased congestion or highway expansion, each of which have associated costs. However, there are still doubts that tolling can be implemented equitably. Transportation investments and decisions to date have burdened Black, Indigenous, people of color, low-income Portlanders, and persons with disabilities. And if tolling proceeds, an explicit commitment to minimizing burdens on these groups and local stakeholder oversight are essential. And with that, I'll stop talking for a while.
Thank you, Shoshana. And thanks everyone. I know there's a lot of supplemental information there. It's a little lighter going forward, but I'm going to give you just a second to read these again. At the end of this whole process, we're going to have a little bit of a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down on how comfortable we're feeling. So if you love these, that's great. I'm going to invite you to kind of wait to express that till then. For now, just to keep us moving, what we really want to hear is if we've missed anything or if we've mischaracterized anything. And as Shoshana said, we're going to talk about tolling system design. We're going to talk about revenue in just a second. But these two statements on the screen, I want you to kind of ask yourself, like, is there something here that you feel like is wrong or missing? And we'll spend about 5 minutes here in conversation. So I'm so glad the chat's been good. There's lots of great information sharing going on, but if anyone has kind of a point they want to raise about that missing or mischaracterized, I see Andy's physical hand, and then I see Jonathan's virtual. So I'll go to Andy first, then Jonathan.
Yeah, the principle of doing things in combination, I think, is really important. There's a multiplier effect there. Howe brought up housing, and that's part of what I'm concerned about, the broader connection of these strategies to land use, which includes housing, but it also includes shopping locations, it includes employment locations. What actions are or could we take in the land use arena that reinforce these objectives and complement the pricing and expansion, for that matter, approaches to doing business? So the word land use wasn't mentioned anywhere. Yeah,
that's great, Andy. I will preview it. It comes up a little bit in the complementary strategies or the revenue piece, but I actually think it's significant enough, and I saw in the chat as well that putting it up kind of here really makes sense too. So we'll document that and the importance of that frame here as well. Thank you. Jonathan.
Hi there. Regarding the second theme, I'm not sure if this is a comment for now or later, but I think the only thing I would add is that that second sentence, how investments in decisions to date have disproportionately, I would just add that word, disproportionately burdened Black, Indigenous, et cetera. So I would just add that concept in there.
I couldn't find my unmute button. That's a great point. Great point. Yeah. Really important and definitely something I think we've heard from this group. I'm not seeing other hands, so I'm and again, there'll be a chance to kind of vote later on the thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down, but I'm kind of going to assume, unless I see hands start shooting up, that there's not much yet that's missing or mischaracterized, that you're feeling like these are capturing what we have talked about. Okay. Well, in that case, then I'm going to keep us moving. So that'll hold open some time for more discussion later, and move us to our next topic, which was system design, tolling system design, and priority outcomes. And Bao was the clairvoyant one tonight. He asked about variable and time of day pricing, and this is really the topic where we start to think about that. So just a little reminder of what we talked about last time. We asked you 2 questions related to system design and priority outcomes. The first was, what factors or outcomes should the city prioritize when it shows up in regional conversations? What should we say should be the top goals of tolling? And really neck and neck, we're minimizing burden on low-income Portlanders and an overall VMT reduction and mode shift. But similar improvements in travel time and trip reliability, which we recognize is very related to VMT reduction, was up there. Reducing and mitigating traffic diversion and maximizing revenue were kind of lower, but as we'll see in a second, I think we talked a little bit more about in the discussion afterwards that, oh, now that I'm hearing about it, the revenue and how the revenue is used is quite significant. We also asked you about when designing toll programs, which type of discounts, exemptions, or rebates should the city advocate for, and the priority there from those at that meeting was for low-income drivers, followed by persons with disabilities, zero or low emission vehicles, and high occupancy vehicles. Or actually, I flipped those last two. And then what we heard in terms of the kind of discussion and comments that surrounded those survey results, right out of the gate, we heard, I don't see reducing greenhouse gas emissions there, or this climate impact. And that was really, really a helpful comment. I think we kind of, in our wonky planner land, really the VMT for us is so congruent with GHG, but I think really being explicit about that climate piece was a key comment we heard. Again, I just want to kind of reiterate, this was also in the part of the meeting where we heard continued skepticism around, whether tolling could be designed to minimize burden on low-income Portlanders or BIPOC Portlanders. And that discussion, as Shoshana already mentioned, about the distrust of no matter what you say your goals are, if there's a legacy of distrust with government, that can be hard to trust. I previewed that revenue piece, maybe not something we want to say is the top priority, but we want to also acknowledge the importance of revenue to maybe making tolling equitable. Calls to really be bold in terms of exemptions and rebates. So we kind of made you prioritize several, but that could be a false choice, although we recognize the dynamics of the more exemptions you provide to a pricing strategy, perhaps the less effective that strategy is at managing demand. However, we heard from you the calls to be really explicit and bold about eliminating pain points. And finally, we heard really the importance of not conflating race and income. We have a framework that leads with race, but talks about the importance of looking at income equity and the impacts on persons with disabilities. And we talked about the importance of not just talking about that all as one homogeneous thing. So just a couple further pieces of information we want to share out at you. And I should have said this at the beginning. We're just throwing a ton of info at you tonight. It's like your graduate level course and pricing continues. Recognizing how crazy last week was, we didn't send you a bunch of pre-reading, but a lot of the stuff we're talking about tonight has a lot of good articles you can chew on, and you guys are so smart and love to do that. So we're gonna send out all these links to you. So a lot of these articles you can read on your own time if you're interested and get a lot more of the backstory. But just to kind of build on what Shoshana was saying, to reach our VMT and climate goals is gonna take carrots and sticks. But it's not just about the VMT side of the equation. What we're seeing from a lot of our studies, and not just with the city, but broadly, is that meeting climate goals is going to require both VMT to go down, and then the vehicle miles that are left to be what's called decarbonized. So that means using less carbon intensive fuels, or if possible, zero emission fuels. And that can be both changing the vehicle to make it a EV, electric vehicle, instead of a combustion engine vehicle, or by just making the fuels themselves cleaner and making us able to use those. So that tool vision eval that Shoshana mentioned, it really shows that fuel shifting in conjunction with the carrots and sticks, and what Andy kind of brought up, that idea of the land use patterns, all of those are really what we need to come anywhere close to our goals. So we want to be really clear about that. And we recognize to date, we've talked a lot about VMT, but the decarbonization part's really important. And the group Climate Solutions also has done some recent analysis that found a very parallel finding. You've got to electrify transportation. And not only does that electrification help us with climate goals, but it helps us with a lot of other broad social benefits. And to the point Shoshana made about car access and the just honest truth that car access is a real, it's access to opportunity in the way that our transportation systems are built. And so thinking about that side of the equation here as well is really important. And so that orange text links you to that article, and so we'll make sure that you have the ability to get to that. And then finally, to the point that Bao teed me up on, just a little reminder of when we had Chris Lepe here from Transform, that there's sort of this theory or this proven fact that the more dynamic and means-based a pricing system, the less regressive it will be. Transform's report creates this little equity matrix that shows as you make something more dynamic, more means-based, it allows for more opportunities for it to be less regressive and potentially more progressive as you go through. But that's really about that kind of sweet spot combination of discounts, rebates, and exemptions, as well as the time of day pricing. So we'll make sure you have the access to that. I think that was also a resource shared by your fellow task force members. So something to dive into. So we get to our next two themes, the emerging themes on tolling system design and priority outcomes. So our first one here is that tolling programs should be explicitly designed to prioritize climate and equity outcomes. That's really one thing we heard from those poll results. Prices should be set to effectively reduce combustion engine and single passenger VMT, while impacts on low-income community members should be minimized through variable rates and discounts, rebates, and exemptions. And then another point, for tolling to advance equitable mobility, safeguards must be built in to avoid discrimination and or disproportionate burdens of payment technology or enforcement systems. More research is needed to identify models for this. You know, this is one that I don't know if we actually touched on much in our very last meeting, but we went back and we reread the notes from all of our parking meetings and our first tolling meeting. And I think this theme of enforcement, technology, privacy, safety have come up in the task force. And we wanted to make sure we captured that here. Because these also not only might apply to tolling, they might apply to future pricing efforts as well. Now, I'll take a breather and ask that question again, which is anything here missing, misstated, or mischaracterizing what you feel like we've discussed today?
I have a question for the second one. Do we need
Sure.
to be explicit on which groups we don't want to disproportionately burden, or is it okay as is?
It's a great question. Any other task force members have thoughts? I'll say, I know one thing that came up, I believe it was actually when we were talking about parking more than tolling, but was the burden on specifically low-income Portlanders to prove that, to prove the qualification for various means-based transportation discounts. And so that was a specific example of, like, if you already qualify for TriMet's honored fare, could that apply here as well? But we could.
This could go back to one of the comments before that said, you know, we don't want to conflate race and income.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think we just need to clarify what we mean in this situation.
Excellent point. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at the first bullet point, and yes, I absolutely agree that it should be explicitly designed to prioritize climate and equity outcomes. But I mean, the purpose of putting tolling in, right, is to, you know, you could go to the extreme with that and, you know, exempt a certain group of low income or something like that, and then make tolling very expensive for everyone else to absolutely reduce traffic to a fairly, like, I mean, you could get really go to the extreme with that. I mean, the purpose of tolling is to also make sure that we have a working and economically vibrant city. So I almost feel like putting a, you know, while, you know, considering like the economic impact or the, you know, the actual flow of the city. These are important, you know, arteries going in and out of the city all the time. So yes, this should be the priority, while also acknowledging that, you know, this is going to impact how our city runs and everything else. And we need to at least consider how that works in the context of equity and reducing EMTs.
Thanks, Aaron. And those are really, really good points. And they speak to, I think we the very first time we introduced the equitable mobility framework, we had a really great discussion about like all these things matter, and sometimes some are more bigger priorities, but we need to acknowledge they all matter. I think that's something we could capture in this theme of these are the priorities, and yet we've got to consider these other things about our system. And you could say that the tolling system that's the best for climate would say no cars ever, no how, no way. That's not going to deliver on the other equitable mobility aspects of what our framework speaks to. Great points. And good dialogue going on in the chat about car share, kind of, I think, building off that point of this being maybe an opportunity to reimagine how we access cars, but also acknowledging the importance of cars and the disparate access to cars we see in our society right now.
Sorry, that was an aside, but back to this point. Is it okay to say BIPOC, or do we need to explicitly call out Black, Indigenous, and Latino communities? Because to me, those three are the ones that are most disproportionately burdened.
Hearing in the chat, I think we should be explicit. Sharif, I see your hand, and Justin.
Oh, personally, I was going to make another comment having nothing to do with that. So if Justin wants to go ahead, that's fine with me. I guess
Hello?
not.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Kind of consistent with my note in the in the chat. I think if it's not tonight, I think we should probably spend some time getting really specific per kind of how and Jonathan's point, whether we mean BIPOC. I know the discussion previously was let's not conflate BIPOC and low income. Do we mean the person should be BIPOC and low income? Or is low income sufficient? And then maybe have a point of view, not like super nitty gritty, but have a point of view on just high level, the how. Like, are we talking about like, if you live in a certain zip code, how would we know that? And because we're gonna step on landmines if we start saying like, hey, give me your Black card to get a discount. So I think it's probably worth us talking through like, well, what does that mean?
Great points. And I welcome, I think we should talk about this now. So I welcome others who have thoughts on this who want to raise their hand or put anything in the chat. Please feel free to do so. But then we can also continue exploring this in the future. But I appreciate that. We need to drive towards specificity here. Sharifa, why don't you jump in with your comment?
Oh, I was, as far as the BIPOC thing goes, versus disabled or low income or whatever. I mean, I think someone who is, speaking for myself, the term disabled bugs the crap out of me. In some ways, I'd rather be called handicapped. And I'm not going to go on and on in details, but language is powerful. And to me, handicap is not as dooming as the whole DIS, dis, and disabled. Now, that being said, language is something that we all use together. And it's something that I kind of noticed with like the Latino community. I think there's been a lot of resistance to the term Latinx. And I think that with BIPOC, I think there's an element of, are we getting too academic here? I mean, we're trying to keep it real, I would think. And I think that it is an issue and it does need to be discussed. And also, just so you guys know, I don't see these chat things. So if you got something really important to say, can you say it? And what else was I going to say? I think that pretty much sums it up, what I was going to say. I felt like it was something else I was going to say having to do with one of the bullet points, but then we kind of got off on it. But I think, I think that low income, I think, and if I were to have it my way, I think that that is the most important aspect of it. And as someone that's disabled, specifically what I'm disabled with the hearing loss and the low vision and blindness, basically, in those two categories, 70% of people who suffer from either deafness or from vision loss or both are unemployed. And that's a national statistic. I think it's 65 to 70. I don't know how recent that statistic is, but some of us are independently wealthy if we're lucky enough. Some of us have a roof over our head like I do. But I think there's, you could probably cover a lot of disabled people with the low income bracket, just because so much, I mean, if we're officially disabled, we're on Social Security or whatever. So we're on a fixed income. Or if we're not officially disabled, we're struggling to work. And as I did for 15 years before I got on Social Security. So I think for me personally, I feel like the low income term would be better. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharifa. Really, really helpful points. And I want to read a couple things that have come into the chat too. And thank you for that reminder. The chat is great, but it's not the most accessible to folks that aren't joining us on a desktop or laptop computer. Tammy said, I think we should focus on all low-income Portlanders. Why would we call out separate groups? Or are we not just talking about low income? Justin said he suggested some kind of address zone, like zip code, as a possible means for exemption among potential others. And Aaron thought maybe zip code combined with income. And then we've got a couple comments from the Mount Scott Arleta Neighborhood Association. Not having enough money makes life intractable for all walks and ethnicities. Poverty is the problem. Low income terms works for all. Shani said this also speaks to people who haven't been diagnosed. Anyway, and then Ingrid said, as a BIPOC female, I don't think I should get an exemption unless there are other reasons related to race. And on that last point, I wanted to kind of offer one thing that I noticed in this last bullet as someone involved in kind of synthesizing it is there are multiple points being made here. There's a point about enforcement and a point about the technology or means of payment. And then there's also a point in the first bullet about the rebates. And I'm recognizing that we need to be more explicit and careful about the points of not conflating different groups, also then not conflating the different burdens that are placed on different parts of a policy design on different groups. So I do think we're hearing a lot about, there's a specific burden that comes from a toll on a low income group, and calling that out might also cover other groups that are disproportionately low income. Enforcement might be a different issue for our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And we should not be smushing this all together as we have here. I hope it's okay for me to be as bold as to say that, but something I just wanted to offer. And I will turn it to Monique now.
Thank you. That's actually a really good segue. I also wanted to call out the importance of being specific on multiple fronts. For example, I live in the Elliott neighborhood, which is right by I-5. And when I think of historical impact on this neighborhood, for example, there's both the destruction of generational wealth in Black communities, and there's ongoing issues where Black communities bear a higher burden of things like the pollution. Harriet Tubman School, for example, is right by the freeway. And that is, I think, the highest percentage of Black middle school kids in Portland. So even though someone might not be low income, I do think that it's really important to call out BIPOC communities as being disproportionately burdened in the past, and also hopefully disproportionately we'll see some of the advantages of revenue that we could use from this system.
Mm-hmm. Excellent points. Bao, go for it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had to unmute myself 2 places. So anyway, I have a double mute just to be safe. Yeah, so a really great point. I think regarding the second point, how we can make the design more equitable, how we can avoid discrimination. I'm thinking, I think along the similar lines about how we can make the implementation of policy easier, less pain, right? Like less friction. What things we can build into the anti-discrimination piece that can be easily translated into your eligibility test. Like, so would you be getting, say, exempt based on your income? Okay, if you make, below a certain level, you will not pay the toll, you pay half the toll, let's say, just for example, right? Or based on job class. I think I heard, in a previous conversation, like say, if you say a Latino guy, you work in less gaming company, I'm just making an example, or it could be Asian guy, right? So you need your truck. So, but you'll be burdened if, there's toll on you, right? So could there be exemption or less toll based on job class? So I think how we can, tie the 2 pieces together, connect the dots. One dot is, how to make sure it's more equitable, anti-discrimination. And secondly, how we translate that the ideas, these principles into a, workable, easy, pain-free solution. So really, that's my point. So thanks, back to you.
Thanks, Bao. So to kind of just sum up some of the things that I think I'm hearing, is really a theme of specificity. We really need to pull this apart, and we need to pull it apart in a few different ways. Pull it apart and looking, kind of going back to what Shoshana showed us, looking at where the disproportionate burdens are today so that we understand who is disadvantaged, and then, so that's our baseline. Then in terms of this topic of design, we need to be specific about who we need to prioritize for discounts and exemptions, who we prioritize for designing in terms of accessibility of means testing and being able to participate in the system, who we're specifically designing around for an enforcement side, and those may all be different groups. But then to your point, Bao, we also need to kind of think about just how we make this a workable program, and all those different component parts. Aaron, go for it.
Yeah, I think just kind of continuing on that theme, what Justin was mentioning about that we are talking about transportation. And so geography does matter in context of income as well. Someone that's making some money but has easy access to public transit may be different from someone making the same amount but has no access to public transit and has no recourse other than a vehicle, or if there are no grocery stores or other hospitals, essential living near them, and they don't have a choice but to do that. So so I do think geography does play a role. Often it will probably be in line with if you wanted to paint it all with the same economic brush, but I do think that where it is, back to land use, et cetera, does play a role in that. And then I guess I had another question going back to the first part when you're talking about tolling system, and prices should be set effectively to reduce combustion, et cetera. Is this an appropriate spot to also put like prices should be set and and the subsequent revenue where appropriate should be allocated to effectively reduce combustion engine and single passenger? Could we include that in there? I know that we have restrictions on how we can actually spend that revenue, but if we're talking about a full tolling system, there's 2 different sides to that. Not only the money that's being charged and the effect on people, but that revenue should also have that same mandate and same purpose to be applied for these goals.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect thought to segue us to our next topic, which is the revenue and complementary strategies. But let's keep that idea alive. So I like where you're going. Like, should we keep the same framing we've got here on the design side, how we're going to price, to then how we're going to spend any revenue? So we'll come back to that in just a second, but thanks for teeing that up. Shoshana, jump in, and then Sharifa's got her hand up, and then we'll move.
Oh, sorry, Sharifa can go first.
Okay, Sharifa. Oh, but you're still muted, Sharifa.
No, go ahead and tie up this, and I will pop in later with what I want to talk about. I think. Okay. Well, actually, I just have one. Wait. I just have one quick question that maybe is answered. I know that at the beginning of our discussion with the tolling, that a couple of those guys that came from California that talked with us said that in London that some of the discounts and rebates and whatever had blunted the effect of, in that case, I guess, cordon pricing. So is any of this stuff you're going to have us read have anything to do with that? Send us home, because both of those guys mentioned it, and none of us really explored that. And I think that we're definitely leaning toward discounts and rebates, and I want to know that we're not going to asterisk.
It's a really, really good point. So the Transform report that we'll link here talks specifically about that, and it's specifically about that London case study where they did provide exemptions based on people who live within the priced zone, as well as people, I think they have called a blue badge program. If you are a person with a disability, you also, I think, are exempt or pay a reduced fare. Anyway, and over time they've shown reduced some of the effectiveness of the demand management. So yes, you'll be able to read into that more. Two, my second point is that, we heard last time that let's realize that and learn about that. Let's also, we kind of heard, be so bold as to say, what would it take to do it equitably, and put that on the table. And then so part three is we do in 2021, what we're hoping to do is when we start pulling this all together is start to kind of look at how this could actually maybe work in a Portland-like scenario, and see those kinds of levers. You turn this up and you turn that down, what would happen to these various goals? So, we're not going to be able to give you exactly precise, go out tomorrow and implement it, and we can guarantee what you'll see solutions. But we hope to be able to kind of move from this sort of theoretical space to a bit more of a, what could this look like here, and what could all those dials do? Hope that helps.
I asked primarily just because I tried to research it myself and didn't really come up with much. So that's why I was hoping you guys send us some stuff.
Totally. Yep, we will send that out.
Okay, Shoshana?
Thank you.
I guess a couple things, and one maybe just even to Sharifa, your last point, and tying back a little bit, Aaron, to I think the point you raised a while ago. Often as the city has weighed in previously on tolling, we have led with, tolling one of the main things should be around demand management and helping the system flow really well. And I think in response to, hearing really, and that has, if the system is flowing better and we're managing demand and reducing VMT, there are clear climate benefits. I think we were trying to capture hearing from you all, like really being explicit about that climate, but I wonder if we need to, to the point and to Sharifa's point, like we also, the first point should be to try to get the system working well and achieve climate benefits, equity benefits. But if we, if we were just going for climate equity, maybe we would just not toll at all. I don't, so just feels like that it may be worth continuing to think about that. And then the one other thing I just wanted to say, Emma, as you were sort of summing up what everyone is saying, and totally hear the need for specificity, and it sounds like we have some work to do in some of these areas. I just want to be a little cautious in saying we need to fully understand the disparities just because we've been doing so much work to try to gather data and realizing that there's so much missing data. And I think just it would encourage you all to be as specific as as possible as you think makes sense about the people that you care about and the, you know, the intentions that you want with this program, but we may not be able to base it 100% on exactly, you know, who is being impacted exactly perfectly right now, because there's just a lot of missing data. And especially as we're doing something like this, pointing towards you know, a tolling conversation that ODOT is still running, there's a lot of data we're just not going to have right now. So just a little bit of a balance between being very specific about the intentions here and not needing to have a complete picture before making any decisions, because I think it'll be hard.
Very, very excellent point. Yeah. Okay, I saw Ingrid's hand up and down. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. I'm going to keep us moving, but I wanted to read out, you know, Ingrid's comment from the chat, and I think that's a nice segue into this last topic about revenue and complementary strategies. About we want to encourage a change in vehicle types and fuels for certain professions, for example, that can afford it and are benefiting while others are being polluted. And this theme of, you know, fuel shifting, decarbonization, as well as making alternatives to driving more robust is going to come up in the next topic. So I'm just going to move us forward if that's okay. So just a reminder, our questions we asked you last time was first, when considering highway toll projects, what complementary strategies are important to evaluate and or what areas are most important for toll revenue investment? To summarize kind of this, we had transit 1, 2, 3. Transit service was the top, followed by transit infrastructure, and then subsidies or incentives to encourage the use of transit, followed by cash rebates, biking and walking infrastructure, or financial incentives. Sorry, these all got kind of cut off. Financial incentives for biking and walking. Down there towards the end, the lowest prioritized investment areas from those who were at the meeting was highway maintenance and highway expansion. And we also had kind of it was really interesting. We had a question teed up about local involvement, but you actually jumped on it before we even got there about how important is local involvement and kind of overseeing where that revenue should go. And really a strong outcome of the last meeting was it was very important to the task force. The one other there was someone who said if we had a little bit more trust in who was making those decisions, maybe not so much, but I think that this feeling of wanting to have that local oversight was a real takeaway. And then the comments that kind of gave that discussion some color, we heard this desire to know, you know, we can have our own sort of priority list of investments, but there's also this question of which investments are most likely to benefit or improve outcomes for BIPOC Portlanders and all Portlanders. What's the data behind that? How do we know really what to prioritize? This is that point that Andy brought up at the beginning, but we realize it's important throughout is housing and transportation, and what complementary investments should we be making in affordable housing and anti-displacement to make sure folks can live in places that have good mobility options. The opportunity through this to address issues on orphan highways. And I do want to take a super quick moment here. Task force member Esme Miller is not able to be here tonight, but did send us some comments and wanted to say my primary input for this evening would be that the failure of the Metro Transportation Measure, with the failure of the Metro Transportation Measure, we should prioritize bike and ped safety and transit improvements to the orphan highways amongst potential projects to be funded by congestion pricing. So that point again, and then this local revenue being a big key linchpin. This is a lot of words on the slide. Basically what I want to say is we hear that question, that really good question about what do our currently marginalized or overburdened communities want in terms of their mobility options, and what mobility options help us reach our goals. So on that first part of the question, there's more work needed to understand mobility needs and priorities, and we are hoping in the rest of our time together to be able to provide some more information. We're looking at some survey opportunities, as well as maybe some potential focus grouping opportunities to do that. But Metro has done some really interesting analyses. We'll send you all these links looking at these mobility needs and priorities. And recent research suggests, that research from Metro, that making non-driving modes more accessible, efficient, and affordable would benefit low-income and BIPOC Portlanders. One of the findings was that while most people say they rely on driving, 48%, it's a little under half, but 48% are interested in using non-driving options more. That was from a 2017 survey. And that non-driving options particularly play an important role in the lives of youth and lower income residents. That was a finding. They also did some really interesting message testing. One thing that's come up in this group a lot is sort of like how whatever might come out of this falls politically or falls in the public's ears. And so I thought this was fascinating, that causing less pollution, reducing stress, and saving money were like the things that would most be compelling to get people to drive less. But they're also interesting to think about in terms of what we might want to say in terms of a design of a pricing system potentially. And then there was a specific report done on some focus groups with communities of color, and many BIPOC residents already use non-driving options, and they say that they want greater ability to predictably plan and count on reliable, safe, and comfortable trips. So that being a real need in the system. And again, we're hoping to augment this with a lot more information. And finally, another thing happening at PBOT while we're all turning away over here is something formerly called the TDM Action Plan, the Transportation Demand Management Action Plan, but that's too wonky. So now we call it the Way to Go Plan. And Michael Espinoza is one of the project management team members for that. So they're looking at way beyond pricing, how do we take all those carrots and those sticks and come up with a framework of where the Bureau should be, what the Bureau should be doing to manage demand for our roadways. And really similar to the vision eval work, they're finding the same thing. You got to have the carrots and the sticks. You got to have the disincentives and the discouragement and the encouragement. But interestingly, and we're going to share this memo with you too, the firm Fair and Peers did kind of a lit review and an assessment of TDM across a bunch of cities. And they found that beyond pricing had one of the biggest impacts on VMT. The other areas were incentives, so things like employer subsidized transit and free or subsidized transit passes for older adults and youth. And then transportation demand management requirements, so things like that are policy levers to require, we talked about employer parking cash out, and we'll come back to that in the future, or commute trip reduction requirements at the state level. And again, like Vision Eval, it was the combo that had the biggest augmented impact. So pretty consistent there, and a good memo for you to read whenever you want to just think about this fun stuff. So finally, our last two themes. These ones are chunky. So I'm going to give you some time to read them and really process them. But the first one was, the use of revenue is very important. And that if revenue use is restricted, this is one thing we heard, tolling is less likely to positively impact equitable mobility. And if driving is more expensive, robust alternatives must be available. Revenue should be available to support these alternatives, and that transit is one of the most critical investment areas. And then this big guy down here is trying to capture a little bit more. Tolling is not a standalone solution. Our region must continue to make non-driving options more accessible and attractive, while also improving car access for low-income people when non-driving options are not realistic. And then this includes a bunch of things: the investments in the other modes, their infrastructure, expanding incentives, land use planning and policies to create more complete neighborhoods, preservation and development of affordable housing, and support for transitioning to electric and low carbon fuel powered vehicles. So a lot in there. Feel free to kind of digest and then let us know if anything feels like it's missing or has been mischaracterized. And I see Bao bringing up transit-oriented development. Bao, anything else you want to say on that? Is that kind of for that second one where we're talking about land use things? Is that where you'd like to see mention of TOD?
Yeah, I think, yes, I meant second point. I think for those folks who may be less familiar with TOD, the concept is, I think my understanding, could be wrong again, is encourage, I think, housing development, employment development along the major corridor transit lines, right? So that you can easily access to transit stops, station, versus you need to drive to a park ride and then take the transit. So again, this is also tied to the land use, long-term planning, housing policies. Everything's tied together, connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bao. Suddenly I've lost the ability to see hands, but
So Emma, so to piggyback on that, I think it's also important to make sure that to call out transit-oriented development that includes affordable housing, because TOD can also gentrify neighborhoods because they don't include enough affordable housing units. And so I think we need to be explicit about that if we're going to include transit-oriented development.
Thanks, Hal. Great point. Sharifa?
I do not support any inclusion of transit-oriented development. Metro already spends pretty much all of the revenue that TriMet makes on transit-oriented development, on subsidizing developers to build buildings. And aside from that, where we really need transit is not in transit-oriented development. We really need transit in those places that aren't that accessible to transit. And I think it'll take us 100 years in order to make this whole city transit-oriented development. It's just gonna take too long. And basically our entire transportation system plan revolves around transit-oriented development. Meanwhile, I can't get to my friend's house in Hillsborough past 7 o'clock because she doesn't live in transit-oriented development. And there's no way I'm gonna support that. I don't want it touching this. That's my feeling. Sorry, I just wrote a 10-page paper on this like 6 months ago.
No apologies needed, Sharifa. I really appreciate your, this is what we want in the task force. We want this kind of robust discussion. I wanna, probe up some of the language that is in there and see how this is feeling to both, you and Bao, so can I see like on both these sides. So what we've tried to talk about here is that land use planning policies to create more complete neighborhoods. That's a little bit of a wonky term. It comes from our comprehensive plan, but it's about having services and jobs and things that are walkable, bikeable, that you can get to in a, I think it's 20-minute neighborhood. Looking at my planners to help me out. And then the preservation and development of affordable housing near centers and corridors. So that's trying to look at it from the housing side as well, and the kind of anti-displacement, the preservation of that affordable housing. I'm wondering if there's, that coupled with maybe more explicit language on transit service expansion can capture some of the values that we're both communicating here. And if others have thoughts on that. Monique, I see your hand up.
I just wonder, to Sharifa's point, to me, there's a difference between making transit more accessible, and also potentially there will be people who still live where transit isn't accessible or as accessible. And I think some of that might be people's personal preferences. Not everyone wants to live in a transit-oriented area. Also price, which again goes back to, if we're building more along corridors, providing more supply, not necessarily giving developers subsidies, but providing more supply in areas that are transit-oriented or accessible, then hopefully more people will live in places that can be accessible. Not speaking to, there will still be individual choices of people who don't want to live by transit or who can't live by transit. So just wanted to perhaps probe a little bit there.
Thanks, Monique. Great points. And one of the reasons this one's so large is I think we're trying to really capture that lack of a silver bullet solution for a lot of those things that Monique just brought up. There's preferences involved. There's also affordability pressures, gentrification pressures, and there's a lot of, we kind of talked last time about the sort of time horizons. We may have this like goal, you know, Ingrid just put it in the chat of like the complete, whether the complete neighborhood is a far off unicorn myth is one conversation, but it's our goal. But that said, in the immediate term, in the near term, how do we meet people's needs? How do we take sort of a more nuanced approach to this? And that's one reason we also have the improving car access for low income people when non-driving options are not realistic. So we're really trying to kind of look at all the angles in this one. And I'm just checking out my chat too to see if anything has come in. I'm gonna I found out that the Mount Scott Arleta Neighborhood Association is actually Stephanie. And I think, Stephanie, this Zoom makes you send things privately sometimes. I'm just gonna copy your comment, if that's okay, and put it in the full group chat. But Stephanie writes, in my low income neighborhood, we can't attract services and stores even through CM1 zoning permits. Even though CM1 zoning permits their inclusion, developers are building apartment buildings without retail or commercial at ground level because the neighborhood simply does not have the wealth to support retail and commercial entities. Justin, sorry, just saw your hand. Go for it.
That's all good. A couple of things. So an analogy comes to mind that kind of makes me think about how inefficient this all seems with tolling connected to solving the problem we're all working through, and that's like tax cuts. It's like if you're wealthy and you have a huge tax bill, tax cuts really help you. If you're making 30 grand a year, tax cuts don't really help you all that much. And it kind of seems like the same thing here, where if you're low income, we're going to give you a discount on tolling. Maybe you drive on those highways, maybe you don't. Maybe you probably still take 20% longer to get to work. I know there's the societal benefit of eventually, hopefully, reducing the traffic. That's all TBD. So it seems like the tolling itself does not provide any benefit to the communities we're trying to provide benefit to, or at least increase equitable mobility. And then what we're really talking about is the solutions. So then that kind of brings in the revenue. That really tolling then seems like a means to an end. So it seems like a means to get the revenue to then pay for the solution, which we're constitutionally dubious that we'll actually be able to spend it on that solution. And so that's why I use the word inefficient. It seems like a really inefficient way to go about solving the equitable mobility problem, because we have a ton of solutions and a ton of ideas around solving that problem, but we're almost using tolling to just fund those solutions. Where is the problem that we just need to get the money some way? Maybe tolling is an option to pay for these solutions.
It's really very good food for thought. I think this gets back to kind of the topic before too, about like our outcomes for tolling. And so it's so complex because there's the two sides of the coin. There's what tolling in and of itself could do to manage our system to, yes, it can generate revenue. It can also potentially reduce VMT, improve travel time and reliability, those things. And those may have some impacts. And then the price also has some burdens. And then there's the other side of the coin. And then I think your point about the efficiency. So is this the right tool? I think is like the question, and it's such a good question. And this is why these tools like Vision Eval or the Fair and Peers research, all the stuff that we're trying to throw out at you with the kitchen sink tonight, what they keep coming back to is that there may not be one efficient solution that does it all. And it may take kind of a combination of these. But I think that the point about this being potentially inefficient and potentially is a completely valid one that we should continue exploring. Sharifa and then Val. And I also just want to make sure folks who haven't had a chance to speak tonight, feel free to chime in here. I'm going to move us forward in about 4 minutes so that we just can keep going with our agenda as well. But Sharifa, go for it.
I just wanted to point out with the revenues thing, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, is that the revenues can't be protected. We can say what we want them to be for, but we cannot earmark them. And I think, and especially with this with the decriminalization of drugs, which something I actually fully support, but in that measure was basically a reallocation of funds from education to this new program. And there's nothing to stop that from happening here with the tolling revenue. It can be done by an outsider with a lot of money that wants to do something here. You know, it can be, that once this is implemented, it goes. There's not much we can do or say about it. And I think that's the thing that makes me the most nervous sometimes.
Thanks for that, Sharif. And I'm realizing I don't think in these two themes that we have here, we have called out the theme of the importance to this group of the local oversight of toll revenue. I'm looking at Shoshana to see if I'm maybe just too tired, but I think that that's kind of, I think, and I want to also make sure I'm hearing you, Sharif, you know, we could say that till the cows come home. There's also the question of whether that is true or could happen. But I just want to make sure that we didn't intentionally leave that out. And so that might need to be added here.
I don't think we intentionally left it out. I thought that it was in one of the, it was like in the second bullet of the overall one.
Okay.
But I'm not looking.
We're going to look at them all together in a second and try to remember where everything landed.
Second bullet of the first section.
Thanks, Michael.
But it could be added here too.
Yes, absolutely. Val, I'll take your comment and then I'm going to sum up a couple of things in the chat and then we're gonna see how we're all feeling about this all.
Yeah, just to be quick, thank you, Emma. I would like just to end to Justin's comment. I think it's spot on. I really liked his metaphor about, you know, we have this tendency trying to use one tool to address all the yields problems. There are many other programs, Emma, as you mentioned, the city is working on, or the transit, you know, agency is working on, like Roselay Project, Transportation Wallet, you name it. There's no like silver bullet here. Yeah, we have to keep the efficiency and overall I'm thinking about the task force, the guiding principles or the framework. I think we should keep that in mind. Always come back to that. I do remember there's moving good economy goals as well, as I think some other mentioned, very important. So back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to read a couple of comments from the chat. We had one for Tammy, wrote, one concern around ridership for transit is time. If one can drive quicker to the destination, they will choose to drive. Expanding to rural areas is not a good use of funding due to perceived low ridership. Sorry, scrolling is kind of tricky on this. Bao said he agrees with you, Justin, that revenue is a byproduct of the main goals, climate and equity. Stephanie, ideally, we would guarantee low-income people an annual basic income, which they could spend as they wish. With that in place, we could proceed with sticks, lots of sticks that put an end to solo commuting, 3 to 4 car households and low mileage cars. Jonathan writes, maybe one of our key suggestions at the end of this effort should be removing the constitutional limitations on revenue. And Tammy wrote, tolling is also about moving goods, right? Reducing congestion on the freeways. And Justin wrote, he seconds the removing the constitutional limitations. All really great points. Thanks, Tammy, too, for bringing up the our first part of the framework is moving people and goods. And that's, you know, there's never enough time, but that is a very important piece of this and kind of making I think the point that Aaron was making and a couple themes ago, making the system work better for moving people and goods is also important. And then this constitutional limitations piece, you know, we hear you loud and clear, the importance of this. That's why we asked that question really directly last time. We also are trying to be really transparent about sort of what the city can do and what the facts on the table are at the moment. You are an advisory group and we'll take this feedback on board and reflect that in the record of the process. So anything else you want to say on that point, Shoshana? Okay, I'm going to move us forward then. So we're going to take a poll. I'm going to paste So I'm gonna do a couple things. I'm gonna paste the link to the survey in the chat in just a second. First, I'm gonna ask Michael, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen is what I'm gonna do. Michael has been super wonderful. If I can find a way to stop sharing my screen, hold on, sorry. Thank you, Michael. Michael's been sharing, been sort of taking notes on the things that have come up around these themes as we go. And could you zoom in a little bit, Michael?
Yeah, for sure. There we go. So in red, I've just put some of the comments and conversations as changes or additional things that should be included. And so in that first one, under the big bucket of tolling and equitable mobility, there's that land use element and framing that should be incorporated in. And then in the second bullet, we've added some language around investment decisions have disproportionately burdened the BIPOC community. And then just to this recent conversation section, like you'll see in red, local stakeholder oversight is essential, and specifically oversight of revenue allocation and concerns around revenues being reallocated in the future and earmarked for other uses. And then in that next bucket of tolling system design and priority outcomes, there was this theme, and let me know if I captured it right, but it was really about finding the balance between a lot of the goals or values that are across the equitable mobility framework. And then for this next bullet, there was a lot of great discussion around like clarifying who, and particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low-income communities, were the groups that I heard that need to be called out, but really with further specificity around why. And there's that sort of bucket of burdens of payment and who that impacts, and as well as the enforcement burden and poor air quality burdens. There is the thread around designing for easy implementation or thinking through like what that might be. And Bao, I think this was your point, so let me know if I heard it right, but I think you suggested maybe there's a job type element, or like depending on your industry or something, like maybe that would be a sort of a easy way in a sense to either give people a pass or a discount or something like that. And it really, I think, ties to this last point about more research is needed to identify sort of the best model, but those are really important things to think about. And then there was this thread around geography being really important, especially when you think about areas that don't have transportation options, and then making provisions for those areas and keeping that area in mind. And then the third bucket is tolling revenues and complementary strategies. And for this one, we had a lot of discussion around transit-oriented development and arguments in favor of including it and arguments in favor of not including it. And so I wonder if that, gosh, I can't see anybody.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Oh, there you are. So I wonder if that's something we might want to dig into more sort of before we do a poll. While you think about that for a second, I just wanted to say the last two comments that I heard that I think work sort of overall is like, some suggestions to remove the constitutional limitations and do some work around, planning for revenues in that sense. And then, highlighting that, moving goods is an important element of this. And just in our conversations, we, you know, we've heard it, but it hasn't always been present in all the sections of our conversation. And so it's kind of bringing that up as well.
Great summary, Michael. I do agree with you that before, so what we're going to do, guys, we're going to ask you the question of, do these themes with the notes and sort of the amendments or revisions we've sort of suggested making tonight, if they capture the task force's sentiment to date? And specifically, remember when Shoshana showed, you know, there's some timely upcoming conversations, and we would like to be able to share these emerging themes with our city leadership, and then, you know, use them to inform those live conversations. All of our meetings are open to the public, and all of the information is accessible for anyone to view, and these wouldn't be final recommendations, but it could have some weight if we felt like this is really capturing where we're at right now, and these are things we want to communicate up the chain. But before we do that, without your kind of weighing in, we want to ask you, you know, if we're going to do kind of a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, and thumbs down. Thumbs up's going to be, I'm feeling comfortable with this capturing where we're at in the tolling conversation, with these being shared more broadly. Thumbs sideways is, I think I'm generally comfortable, but there's some things missing and I'd like to have more conversations. And thumbs down is, I'm uncomfortable. I don't feel like this is capturing what we've talked about to date. But to do that vote, I do feel like there's a couple outstanding things we should confirm, because it's hard to vote if you don't know which way we're going to go. And so on the TOD thing, I guess I want to ask the group, one thing I heard was if we're more explicit about the dynamics of improving transit access and coverage, as well as the importance of providing and creating these complete communities and avoiding displacement that allows people to be closer to those mobility options, that might capture what some folks were trying to say about TOD. Can I kind of get, if anyone is opposed to not explicitly adding TOD, so I'm suggesting we don't add transit-oriented development to this wording, but instead we work on clarifying some of these dynamics of transit access, land use, and housing. Are people comfortable with that, or does anyone want to raise their hand and say, I would like to have TOD still in there? See a thumbs up from Andy. Thumbs ups, thumbs ups, thumbs ups. Okay. All right, then I think we're going to proceed. If that's okay, Michael, we won't add language around TOD to that last one, but we will work on that kind of clarifications. Okay, well, with that then, I'm going to place a link to a little survey in the chat, and give you guys a few minutes to open that in your windows and respond to that thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down.
Maybe I'll just add, and I think Emma essentially said this, but you know, I think it is possible both for us to share. This is, you know, along the lines of what folks are thinking, and you know, want it to help inform if there are live conversations in the next couple of months, and to say very explicitly, as we shared at the chain. And there's a lot of, you know, a lot of the questions, especially on system design and stuff, there's a lot more to grapple with. And, you know, we will continue to work with the task force to give you more refined recommendations later. So just, I know it still seems hard if there's some things that are not settled, but I think we can do both if folks feel like it's at least close. It's not meant to be like, this is final recommendations.
And it's a really good temperature check for us to see how we're doing at capturing the amazing feedback you are giving us. So we really, really appreciate it. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Is anyone having issues with the survey?
Hey, Emma, my computer is dying. I'm going to sign off and sign back on in a second.
Okay, okay. We'll see you in a second. And while folks are taking the survey, Eric, thank you so much for that clarification. I'm sorry, folks, that I misspoke when characterizing kind of an outcome of the climate solutions research, and that really it's this combined VMT and electrification scenario that had the highest kind of co-benefits. So thank you, Eric, and apologies everyone for garbling that. And thank you, Monique. We can work on getting a definition of TOD and sharing that with the group.
You asked if any of us have issues with the survey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I sort of feel like it's an interesting thing because I think that, you know, there's a few of us that are at one end of the spectrum, a few of us at the other end of the spectrum, and a whole bunch of us in the middle. And it's weird to sort of, I'm answering this survey with everybody, almost like the average, as if I'm not, as if, you get what I mean? It's like, I'm not answering for myself. I'm kind of answering, I'm compromising. Does that make sense? Am I supposed to be?
Thank you for bringing that up. No, I'd love you to I hope that you feel very comfortable giving us your opinion and your level of comfort. And we are all friends here, and we're really like interested in your individual perceptions and how you're feeling. And I think that that's really actually important because we've in our charter, we were really explicit. We do not have to come to unanimous consensus here. But we want to honor everyone's kind of individual perspective and opinion. So thank you for sharing that that's how you're feeling, and I want to encourage you to answer it from the Sharifa perspective. Okay. Mariana is keeping an eye on the survey results for us. Mariana, does it look like we have most people responded?
I am double refreshing right now. So I tallied we had 17 people in attendance, so 16 have responded, okay. If I got that right. Let's see, we had 25%, about 4 people voted for sideways, okay. And the majority, 75%, 12 respondents responded to thumbs up.
Okay, and did anyone respond with a thumbs down?
0.
Okay. Well, very, very interesting.
Yes.
So we're here's the deal. We're 5 minutes to go, and I'm not keeping you here past 8. We all got to go eat dinner or do other things. So we're gonna hold on the teaser trailer of Cordons and Ruck, and we'll send you the slides. You can look at that yourself. But trust me, it's going to be okay. So I want to actually end with a little bit of a chance for folks to share their reflections on that. And to the point I just made to Sharif that, we want to honor that there are folks that aren't feeling totally comfortable. What I would love to do is we sent out or we will paste in our meeting evaluation survey, and we really welcome you to follow up with more of the thoughts kind of behind the why there, so that we can work with you and work with the group to address those and have that dialogue between now and when we meet next. But 3/4 feeling kind of comfortable, I think that's encouraging, and we will also take those notes that Michael shared and continue to add to and refine these. Anyone want to add some or verbalize any comments as to why they voted the way they did? And that's okay. Tammy says, I was a sideways thumb. I think we need more clarification around the low income groups. And is that specifically, Tammy, for kind of that specificity around sort of the design and the rebates and exemptions piece?
Yeah, I just don't think we are really clear on that. So it didn't feel like from the discussion today, even that we were real clear on I think, what we really want to target. So I just think it needs a little bit more vetting before it's really presented, so.
Yeah, this is Taryn. I was also a sideways thumb. Yeah, I agree with what was just voiced. Like, I think that we are like almost there, but from like the conversation today, like I heard a few things that I still think that they're like, we're not necessarily on the same page, and there needs to be like a further discussion and a bit more refinement.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, what we also need we can work on is capturing breadth of opinion. We may have differing opinions around these themes, and that's okay. And we just want to make sure we're capturing the breadth of that. So we'll work on refining based on our discussion tonight and any follow-up information you guys provide, and then share that back out with the summary to get your further thoughts. We've got just a couple of minutes left. So with that, I'm going to just quickly share my screen one more time and say, you know, we've talked a lot about themes tonight. There's clearly a lot to talk about the themes. There's also a lot of questions we haven't answered. And this is going to be a lot of text. We'll send you the slides, but we just wanted to you to know that like there's things that have come up too that we haven't provided more information on or provided an answer on. That one we talked about of like actually doing the dials and how effective would tolling be. There's this hope that we can get these themes pretty set and then they can apply to future typologies. And so we're going to keep exploring that. We also know that we still kind of want to learn more about who's driving and parking where in Portland, so that we know who might be impacted about these things. COVID is still happening. We have to think about what that's going to mean for the future of our system. The land use and housing piece, there's a lot of open questions there. And then that piece about what complementary strategies are the highest priority for BIPOC communities and what are most effective and impactful. We shared a little bit tonight, but there's more to come. I'll invite you to tell us any other questions that you don't see here, again, in the follow-up survey. I'm gonna skip all these. And then I'm going to say Happy New Year, because we're not going to see you as a group until January. But we hope to connect with you, as I mentioned, via email or phone over the next couple of months. Can I ask Mariana to, if you can, paste that link in the chat for folks so they can just quickly take the survey? This is our meeting evaluation. We would love to hear what you thought of tonight's discussion, as well as any more of that kind of specific feedback you'd like to share with us. And when we reconvene in 2 months, we're going to be diving into our next topic, which is cordons, area pricing, and RUC. Shoshana, any last words before we wrap up?
The only I'm working on copying the link because it's I don't have it handy, but I'm working. So give me a second.
Thank you.
I think I just want to acknowledge that you know, we spent longer on this one because we felt like there was so much to sort of have detailed discussions on the tolling, and it seems like there still is, and we will. Just I think we also want to continue to talk about next typologies a little bit, but we will. I think again in the break we're hoping to have a little bit more time to think about how to continue.
Oh, Shoshana, I'm so sorry. Your audio is like fading in and out, and so we kind of stopped to hear you. But
never mind then. Just Happy New Year.
I think where you were going was we're gonna do our best to respond and get back to folks, and we really appreciate this discussion, and more to come via email. All right, folks. Well, Jonathan says the holiday season is here. How can it be? I agree. How can it be? But it's been such a pleasure to be on this journey with you guys since January. It's gone really fast. I can't believe it's already November. And thank you, Mariana, for pasting that link in there. We really, really appreciate your feedback. Please be candid with us. We really appreciate it. And happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay in touch, and we will see you. If we don't do a little Zoom before then, we'll see you in January.
Thank you.
Have a good night.